Welcome everybody to Noe Lake County. We're glad to have you all here. Just a little word about the library. The Friends of the Library are the ones that provide the refreshments, and if you want to join, there's some little pamphlets over there. They're a great organization. Without them, we wouldn't have any new books this year, so they're wonderful. There's also class evaluation. I need to get a program evaluation made up, but just ignore the class thing. They're over there with the September's newsletter, which tells about what we're doing in September. We don't have October together yet, but we have September. And our program today is with Dr. John Parker. And there was so much in the information on him, I just kind of condensed it real quick. And he was talking earlier about talking to the New York Times this morning and KGO yesterday. So he has appeared on national news and programs and many magazines and journals. He also has been an archaeologist for 43 years. He did his doctoral dissertation focused on the settlement patterns in the Clear Lake Basin right here in our area during the past 12,000 years. He's also played a major part in establishing Anderson Marsh as a state park. Thank you very much for that. And he currently owns Wolf Creek Archaeology. He's served on the Lake County Heritage Commission and is currently the vice president of the Historical Society, where he's the society's curation manager. And he volunteers at the Eli Stage Stop Museum, which is very nice too. So let's.
Yeah, if you've ever been over to the Eli during the Fiddler's Jams, you've probably seen me, because I'm the MC for the Fiddler's Jam. I dress up in my Farmer John outfit. And, go ahead and get these lights so I can see some slides. I have a PhD in archaeology, but don't be put off by the PhD stuff, because everyone in this room has a PhD in something, okay? I just happened to spend 14 years in a little room with a bunch of other students facing a blackboard, so I have a PhD in archaeology. But that's 14 years that I wasn't living real life, so you have a PhD in something else, you know, you have a PhD in something else. If you can get through the 8th grade, you can get a PhD. You don't have to be any smarter. You don't have. You just have to do a little more work, but it's work that's the same level as 8th grade work.
Doesn't that mean piled higher and deeper?
Yes, that's a lot of people have used that. Piled higher and deeper. My folks are in the back. My dad is the reason I have a PhD, because he got a PhD.
Because I'm piled higher and deeper.
That man is my mentor, because he came to California during the Dust Bowl days and worked with his parents' migrant farms up and down. He was a migrant farm worker up and down the state with most of those Dust Bowl people that came to California. He went to 8 different junior high schools because they kept moving from camp to camp, and yet he got a PhD from Stanford University. So yeah. But I got 20,000 years of cultural history to cover, and then I'm going to chip obsidian. So I want to, but first I need to kind of introduce you to archaeology, because some people, I say, oh, you're an archaeologist, you dig up any fossils lately? No, that's paleontology. They look for dinosaurs and stuff. Archaeology studies human stuff left behind. In fact, archaeology.
Talk louder.
Oh, okay. Here in Lake County, we have some of the oldest sites in the New World. In the 1930s, we had a guy by the name of Chester Post who lived over in the town of Clear Lake, and he was wandering around and discovered a site near Borax Lake, which has now been designated a National Historic Landmark because it's the best evidence of early man in California.
Oh.
Yeah. That site has been purchased by the Archaeological Conservancy and is protected and preserved. This is a picture of what that site looked like in 1938. when it was excavated by Mark Harrington from the Southwest Museum. This is what the site looks like today. It is that walnut orchard, the south end of Borax Lake. Here's a picture of the excavation taking place back in the 1930s. And these are the types of artifacts that were found. When he published his work, he was talking about Clovis points and Folsom points being found in California, and how it must mean that those people traveled to California, left their calling cards, and then went back to the Southwest. And anthropologists and archaeologists all over the US said, we don't believe you. There's nothing in California older than 3,000 years, so it couldn't be that. And his stuff got stuck in the bottom of a museum and stayed there from 1940 to 1968, when another team of archaeologists using a brand new dating technique pulled his stuff out of the archives, redated it with this new technique, and guess what? The site is 12,000 years old. Those are Clovis points and Folsom points. Since then, we have found a whole bunch of sites that old in Lake County. It's cool the way that does that. Yeah. So far, about 2,600 sites, actually more than that, have been recorded in the county. It's probably only about 5% of the number of sites that actually exist in the county. 60 of the sites are already listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And Anderson Marsh State Park is the only state park that was purchased specifically to protect a National Register Archaeological District. There are 38 prehistoric sites within Anderson Marsh. Most people that go there see the ranch house. That's not why the park was purchased. I mean, it's a nice old ranch house, and it is historically significant, but that's not why the park was purchased. So, to the scientific community, each of these sites is like a book in a library. Here we are in a library. Imagine that book over there has never been read by anyone, but it's full of information about the people that lived there. The human and the environmental past. So to an archaeologist, we look at these as books, unread books, that'll tell us about the past, both the people and the environment. To the Native American community, these sites are their connection to the elders and the land. So we both have different ideas about the value of these sites, but we both agree that they should be preserved and protected. So I work very closely with the Native American community to try to preserve and protect these resources. So, what is archaeology? That is archaeology. I spent 14 years in college, I have 3 degrees, learning how to study people's garbage. The study of past people and cultural processes through the retrieval and analysis of the remains left behind. Literally, that's what I do. Now, so do law enforcement people when they're investigating a crime. So do private investigators. If you hire somebody, a private investigator, to look into somebody's life, the first thing they're going to do is go to their garbage can and dig through it. Because once you put that out on the street, it's public. And I can find out what kind of toothpaste you use, what magazines you read, how many beers you drink a week. I will know more about you than your neighbors know about you, okay? That's what I do, but on a site that may be 100 years old, or 1,000 years old, or 10,000 years old. It's CSI work on an ancient scale. You know, they may be more recent. This is about 60 or 80 years old, but that will tell me about the people that left that there. What was their lifestyle? What was their economic status? Did they have kids? I guess they did. Were they European or Chinese? So, before I go into the field, I have to do a background research. I won't do archaeology anywhere without first spending 2 or 3 years researching the background of that area. So I know when I'm out in the field what to expect, and when I find something, I know what it means. So we'll use historical photos. This is a 1906 photograph of Kap Aidano, who was a person over at the Big Valley Reservation. He's making shell beads. We'll experiment, try to do cultural things so we have an insight into what kind of skills it takes to do these things. Make tools, we'll try out the tools, try out the lifestyle. Construct a tule house. Try cooking in a basket. Gather and eat traditional foods. This is over on the coast. This is seaweed, which is one of the most delicious traditional Pomo foods that I've tried. You pick the sea lettuce off at low tide, you dry it, you dip it quick in and out, hot grease. It's crispy and salty and it's just like a potato chip. That's Mom and Dad. They're in the back of the room. They're digging clams. And I tried mussels. Dad always tries to brag about the biggest clam. But these are all things that an archaeologist will do to help them understand the culture better, help them understand what they're finding. Talk to the elders. There are memories in the Native American community that go back thousands of years, literally. There's a story told at Middletown about the mountain that was on fire up here and what they had to do to put that fire out. That talks about the last eruption in Lake County. So as an archaeologist, we have to learn the patterns that are left behind when people throw things away. We have to learn how that stuff moves around within a site, whether dogs are carrying bones off over here to gnaw on them, or people are sweeping and cleaning up, digging pits and putting their trash in it, that sort of thing. We have to learn what happens when a site is abandoned. When you leave your home to move, do you leave all your furniture right there? No, you pack it up and you take it to your new place. So when we come across the site, it's not a site that people just walked away from magically and everything is there. It's a site that's been scavenged, been emptied, all the good stuff is gone. Some stuff doesn't preserve. Basketry will not preserve. Textiles will not preserve. We get the stone, we get the bone. Even bone has a hard time preserving in Lake County's acid soils. And then there's the environmental forces that attack a site after it's been abandoned. For instance, I'm going to give you some information that's very valuable. Gophers dig this deep. Their tunnels are this deep below the ground surface. And when a gopher digs and comes to a rock, it never goes around it or over it. It always goes under it. Always. So if you're excavating an archaeological site and you dig down to this level, you're going to find a whole layer of rocks right there where the gophers over thousands of years have gone around or gone under every rock in that amount of soil, and they've all fallen down onto the same level. When I first saw this, I thought it was a purposely made pavement by people.
Oh, wow.
It's not. Gophers do that. We know exactly how much dirt a gopher will move during its lifetime, how much dirt an earthworm will move during its life. I don't. But there's a whole field of archaeology that just studies that. It's called taphonomy. And then there's the biases that the archaeologist brings to the project. If we're using a half-inch screen, then we're not going to get the quarter-inch beads. So we have to know what those biases are, and when we're working on a site, we have to take that into account. What kind of information are we looking for? So this is all stuff. The first thing we do out in the field is survey and set up a grid system. And then we pick a spot within that grid system to excavate. These are pictures taken at Anderson Marsh back in the 80s. And we take detailed notes on everything found. Because as we're reading that book, we have to rip out and burn that page. When we're excavating a site, we're actually destroying it by digging it up. So, and we know that, which is why we'd rather preserve them and leave them in the library for when they're needed than just go out and willy-nilly dig up a bunch of sites. So we take 2 pages of notes on every 4 inches or 5 inches of soil that we dig through, 1 meter by 1 meter square. We screen all the soil and bag all the cultural material. This is actually taking place every weekend right now out at the original location of the Eli Stage Stop. And if you're a member of the County Historical Society, you can come out and join us. So far, the volunteers have put in about 500 hours, 13 different volunteers working out there on the weekends. This Sunday, we'll actually be at the Eli Museum sorting some of the materials that have already come out of the ground. Everything that comes out of the ground is put into bags and labeled so that the crew back at the lab knows where everything came from. And back at the lab, everything gets washed, sorted into categories, weighed, counted, and entered into a computer database. And finally, items to be curated are numbered, boxed, and sent to a curation facility. So that's lab methods. Analysis. For prehistoric sites, we take the bone and the shell and sort it into the different types of bone. This is fish, bird, and mammal bone. Different point styles were manufactured during different time periods, so we sort all that into different categories. This provides information about changes in the culture and the technology over time. The computer will actually create graphs for us showing changes over time as we go down deeper in the site. You can see what was going on as you go further back in time. For historic sites, we look at glassware, ceramics, metal, along with bone and other dietary items. These came out of an outhouse at an all-girls convent school. That was a fun dig. Anybody know what that is? Came out of the same outhouse, but that doesn't give you any hints.
A drain?
Any ideas?
There's a drain?
I thought it was maybe something to let air into a
How big is it?
furnace.
Right.
Oh, how big is it? Oh, it's about this big.
Oh.
That's true, I should have put them.
What's it made of?
It's made out of brass, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Is it part of a musical instrument?
It's a musical instrument. That's what's left of a harmonica after it's been in an outhouse for 120 years. In fact, here's the little reeds. Pretty exciting, huh?
Yeah.
I told you, it's CSI work. And this tells us about the activities that took place, the economic status of the people, their ethnic origin, and so we learn about, not all archaeology is prehistoric, a lot of it is historic. And so yeah, the lake is the oldest lake in the Western Hemisphere. And there's a nice picture of the lake. I'm kind of off the side over here, so oh well.
What do you consider prehistoric versus historic?
Writing. If you have writing, you can keep a history of your culture. If you don't have writing, you can't. So that's historic versus prehistoric. So if I'm doing Egyptology, am I doing historic archaeology or prehistoric archaeology?
Historic.
Historic archaeology, right. Same thing with studying the Mayan along in Central America. That's historic archaeology. Until you get back early enough before they had the hieroglyphic writing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, 20,000 years ago. Here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. Ice Age. This is what the shoreline of Clear Lake looked like 20,000 years ago. Got it? Rain year-round. Lots of water, lots of wetlands, pine and cedar forests all over the lake basin, all the way down to the water line, and no oaks. Oaks don't like wet soil. They get root rot, so they won't live in wet soil areas. In fact, if you're watering a front lawn and you have a big oak tree growing in that lawn, chances are you're going to kill it by watering your lawn. So 20,000 years ago, this is before spear points were invented. This was the hunting tool 20,000 years ago. A sharp stick. And they had woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers and big nasty animals like that. You gonna go after a woolly mammoth with one of these? Probably not. And the woolly mammoths did just fine. And so did the saber-toothed tiger. That was it. Actually, there wasn't that much hunting going on. Mostly it was gathering and collecting. But we do have a site from this time period. And that is the only tool that we have from that time period that we have to go on to figure out what these people were doing. Obviously, we don't have a clue. We know that this is a Napa obsidian knife that was chipped 21,000 years ago.
And the reason you call it Napa, you call it Napa for,
It's from the Napa obsidian flow, which is right on, what is that?
Bottle Rock,
No,
No.
Napa
Yeah.
obsidian flow.
St. Helena.
What is that other road that goes down the,
That's
or Silverado Trail, right there, as long as Silverado Trail. In fact, there's a cut bank right next to the road, you can walk over and get some yourself if you want. Well, historical linguists, people that study languages, past languages, knew that sometime in the past, Hokan speakers and Yukian speakers occupied Northern California. And the Pomo belonged to the Hokan language family. The Wapo, the people of Middletown, belonged to the Yukian language family. These are the two oldest language families known for North America. About 14,000 years ago, historical linguists have been able to figure out that the Hokan speakers started working their way into the Clear Lake Basin. And living on the shores of Clear Lake. These are sites that we've recorded that are 8,000 to 14,000 years old, suggesting that these first people traveled up the Cache Creek drainage from the Central Valley, and they probably kept close ties with their parent communities in the valley to the east. Anytime you populate a new area, you always want the security of maintaining those ties to your old familiar territory. This is when the first obsidian points, projectile points, are manufactured. And those 2 points that are photographed are 14,500 years old. Older than the ones in the drawings, which are Clovis and Folsom points that are 10 to 12,000 years old. So we have here in Lake County the oldest spear points in North America. Chopping tools were made and used. Just crude knives were made and used. No milling tools. Diet was easy, hand to mouth at this time period. So we're right at the end of the Ice Age. By looking at the sites that we've studied from this period, we see small mobile groups of people, small 30 to 50 people in a group, moving from resource area to resource area. They'll use up the resources in one area, they'll pack up and move to a new area. There are very few people around, so they weren't bumping into somebody else's territory. General foraging, no formal trade, and everyone had equal access to all resources. Then everything changes.
Could you tell me what kind of trees those are, most probably? I know that
Big
they're-
The ones in this picture?
Yeah, or generally the ones that are supposed to
I
be
don't know,
here.
this photo was
Oh, that
taken,
wasn't taken there.
this photo was taken 14,000 years ago.
Actually, my question was, what kind of trees did you identify?
Talk a
that were
little
here?
louder, please.
That were here,
Yeah, yeah.
the trees that were here were cypress, pines, some redwoods. And in fact, they're still here.
And what kind of pines would they have been?
I don't know. I'm an archaeologist, not a botanist. If you want to know what was here during the Ice Age, look at the hilltops around this lake basin. Those coniferous forests are the remnants of the Ice Age forests that came all the way down to the lakeshore. And during the next Ice Age, those forests will repopulate and come all the way down to the lakeshore. Yeah, they're still here with us. Yeah, but this was nasty. The last global warming started about 8,000 years ago. And it lasted for 4,000 years. Temperatures, much hotter than they are today. You were getting, what, 105, 110 today. Imagine 120. The temperatures that they're getting in Death Valley during the summer, that's what the temperatures were all over California during this last global warming. And 5 inches less rainfall a year. So the pine forests give way to brush and oak grassland. So these food resources that these people were used to around wetlands, drying up, forcing people to relocate their camps around reliable water sources. Now the lakeshore was a reliable water source, but you had these small groups of people spread out over the landscape. All of a sudden, bang, they're having to get together around reliable water sources. These are where sites are located in Lake County during this early part of the global warming period. They're along major drainages in the lakeshore, places where there's going to be year-round water. And we can look at the changes. This is kind of this chart does not show actual population. This chart shows the amount of inhabited site area during different time periods. You have to assume that the more site area that's inhabited, the bigger the population is. If that's a logical assumption to you, then you can look at this chart and say this is a population trend chart. It's logical to me, and I've studied population for 25 years. But so right here is the global warming period, and you see a little dip in the amount of site area that's being inhabited, which tells me that people died off during this time period. There was a drop in population. They were overpopulated 8,000 years ago based on the climate change that happened.
What explains the huge drop in population prior to that? Or am I
Oh,
reading the
up
chart
here in
back-
more recent periods?
Oh, I am reading the chart.
This,
backwards.
okay, you're reading the
Okay.
chart backward. That's
Oh.
10,000 years ago at that end, and every number is 1,000
Okay.
years more recent. This is
Oh,
today,
yeah. Got it.
right
Got it.
here. Yeah,
Thank you.
that would be confusing. I'm
Yeah.
glad you pointed that out. So we have some different types of spear points that were invented, but the big thing was they needed a new resource for food. And this is when the mano and metate come in. The mano and metate are used for processing grain. All right, here's a broken piece of a metate. Just a little, it's kind of a flat dish-shaped stone. And this rock, that's the shape of my hand, about the size of my hand, Spanish for hand is, very good. That's a mano, a metate. They were gathering grass seeds, grains, and processing grains to make flour because they wanted to? No, because they had to survive. Milling equipment. So this is a shift from just general gathering to a specific resource that you're going after. And these small groups were forced to live close together around reliable water sources. So instead of a wandering settlement pattern, they now have kind of a focused resident base camp kind of settlement pattern. And these larger communities need rules. I mean, us here in this room, if we were one community, no problem. You get 3 rooms of people this size, then you have to say, okay, all the dogs stay in the house during the day. We don't want dogs roaming around our hut. All the women go behind that rock over there. All the men go behind that oak tree over there. You get rules and regulations on behavior when you get big groups of people together. This is when you get political and religious systems developed, because those are the systems that give you those rules of behavior. Yeah. Everyone still has equal access to all the resources. It's just a little more work to get those resources, because you gotta bang and pound and scrape them with mono and metate. So this new technology gives a brand new food resource, and they get so good at it that the population starts to grow. In fact, the population grows to the point where they're starting to use the upland areas. They're settling all around the lakeshore. In fact, about 7 miles, one day's walk, separates each major village around the lakeshore. So this is the end of the global warming period. This is actually a chart from one of those column core samples that the U.S. Geological Survey took of lake bed sediment. And it goes down 25, 30 meters. And these are the pollens that they sorted through and counted. And you can see where it changes from pine and other conifer trees. 8,000 years ago, those trees go away and oak dominates the pollen in the sample. That's when the last global warming occurred.
Do you know about when they started using oak as a major food source?
Yes, I do, and it's coming up, but we're not quite there yet. We're getting close, though. So yeah, so that 8,000 years ago, that happened worldwide. This is when you see grains being processed in the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley. This is when you see beans and corn and squash being developed in Central America. The whole world had to deal with this, and they dealt with it with technology and animal husbandry and cultivation. So the population is growing. In fact, the population grew so much that they outgrew the available grain resources 6,000 years ago. So a new food resource was needed, the mortar and pestle, 6,000 years ago.
That's different from the mono and metate?
Different from the mono and metate. The mono and metate, the mono is a handstone, and the metate is a flat slab for grinding those grass seeds. The mortar and pestle is used with this little guy here, which is acorn. Right. Let me see if I can open this acorn. See if there's one inside here. See if I can cut the table here in the library. Places love it when I come because there's like acorns on the floor and there's chips of obsidian all over the place. Oh boy. I was kind of hungry anyway. Here we go. Yeah, there's the nut. You got to get the acorn off the tree, and then you got to get the nut out of the acorn. And then you got to... Oh yeah, did I hit you with that? Oh boy, this is good stuff. Anybody want to try a piece of acorn? No. You? I'm going to do it just to show you that it's possible.
Yeah.
I blanched them, I ground them up, and I tried
This is
them.
kind of an old one, it's kind of
They're
crunchy.
not very tasty.
Acorns,
Very bland.
they they knew about acorns 9,000 years ago. They didn't use them as a food source until 6,000 years ago. Because it's a lot of work.
Also, they don't have much flavor.
Not much flavor.
Weren't they poisonous?
Also, they're poisonous, thank you.
Yeah, so I'd have to blanch them very
Yes.
well.
If you eat a couple of acorns, you'll be fine. If you eat 20 or 30, you'll feel a little sick to your stomach. If you're still stupid enough to eat more acorns, you'll start to throw up, and you could eat enough to kill you. Deer have an enzyme in their stomach that can digest the tannic acid that's in the acorn that we can't. So deer love them. In order to get that acid out of the acorn, you have to take the acorn, find yourself a rock, bang on that rock long enough till you have a nice indentation in it, and then find another rock and grind this so it's nice and round, and then you do this. This is a sound that you would have heard around Clear Lake everywhere you went.
The children do that, right?
The children, the moms, the grandmas. It was a woman's thing, unfortunately.
Kept them out of trouble.
Okay, so this is a traditional sound. If you were here 1,000 years ago, you'd be hearing this right now.
Why do you whack it instead of twist it?
Huh?
Why do you whack it instead of grind it?
Because this is a pulverizing thing. It's not like the grass seeds where you're trying to crack the husk and then grind the seeds up. This is a nut rather than a seed, so you pulverize it. You have to pound it to pulverize it. And guess what? It's still poisonous. It's just pulverized. So you have to take all of this, go down to the creek or the lake shore, kind of make a dish-shaped area in the sand, cover that with leaves, put all your pulverized stuff on those leaves, and then sprinkle water over it for half an hour. That will leach the tannic acid out of the pulverized acorn. The trouble is, it also leaches out any flavor that it would have had. If anyone's ever eaten poi,
Yes.
that's what acorn mush tastes like. It would be really good if you put a little Hershey's Instant in with it. But by itself, it's not very appetizing. It's poisonous. It takes a lot of work. This is not something you're going to do because you enjoy this material as a food. This is something you're going to do because you've already used up all the other resources, and if you want your population to continue to grow, you have to eat this. Now, I've had very good acorn mush. I'm not saying it's all bad. I had some that had been let sit and ferment for a while, and that was very tasty. And also, when they harvested hitch, the fish around the lake, they would salt dry the hitch, and I've had acorn mush with salted hitch, dried hitch, and that makes a very good combination. I'm going to pass this around. Don't lick it, it's poisonous.
I think they figured out the process to do this kind of thing.
How did they figure out the process to do this kind of thing? If I had a time machine,
Yeah.
The salt that you're talking about, does it go over to the ocean?
the salt that I'm talking about, yes, they would go to the ocean to get the salt. The seaweed that they went to the ocean to harvest and they would dry there and bring back to Lake County was full of salt. Yeah. Salt is a very important thing in human diet. We don't even think about it now because we have so much salt on our table all the time, no big deal. But if you were living then, salt would be something you'd be on the lookout for and have to get either by trade or going and picking it up yourself.
Isn't there salt over there at that borax lake? Or
No.
that's not salt?
So we got some new points that were developed at this time period. In fact, a whole new technology. They started out with just a spear with no tip, and then they ended up with a spear with a stone tip, and that lasted until 6,000 years ago. And then they added to that the dart and atlatl. Atlatl. Everybody together. 1, 2, 3. Atlatl. Very good.
What language?
I made that up. No, that's really what it's called. I don't know what language it's from. It's about this long with a separated tip so that when it hits the animal, the tip comes loose and stays in the animal. You get to retrieve your shaft. So you may have several tips in your kit so you can put a new one on and keep hunting that animal in case you didn't kill it with the first shot. And this is how it's done. It's done if you're a fisherman and you cast a spinning reel. You put your finger over that line and you flip the bail, and as you go like this, you let your finger go. That's how this is done. Only you do it this way. You hold the stick, you have your dart hooked over your finger, like with your finger hooked over the dart, and as you throw, you let your finger loose, and it flies 50 yards, accurate, really killing power. Guess what happens when they start processing acorns? Population takes off. Now again, this is not a chart of population. This is a chart of the amount of area that people are living on. Sites, the size of the sites in Lake County, the amount of site area jumps. I'm assuming it means the population is growing. Then, about 3,500 years ago, we had the most recent volcanic eruption. I suspect it was over in the Oaks, you know those red rock quarries over there?
Yeah.
Those are old cinder cones, and I suspect that's where this eruption occurred. Brown Mountain is a little bit further beyond those cinder cones, and it's a perfectly formed cinder cone. Look at it on Google Earth, it's really cool. And this was what it was like. You cannot save yourself by having an umbrella. These are little teeny beads or large bombs of red hot molten lava that are coming down all over the county. You bet it had an impact on the people. It had this much of an impact on the people. The amount of site area inhabited dropped to the point that it was 1,000 years earlier. There are still stories being told down in Middletown at the reservation about that eruption. Just like we have stories about the flood and, you know, that sort of thing that happened thousands of years ago. Yeah,
Did they die or move?
both.
Oh.
Did they die or move? Yes. A lot of things happened during this time period, 6,000 to 3,500. Group territorial boundaries are established. So if you have your village community in this territory and you need obsidian, and the obsidian belongs is in that territory, you've got to trade with those guys or enter into some kind of agreement to go and get that obsidian. If you're going to trade with them, we need some sort of medium of exchange. This is when the shell bead money economy is invented all over California. At this point, people are living in a central village most of the year, and then they move to seasonal, smaller villages and camps, depending on what resources are available during different seasons. So now we're up to today's climate. This is Mackinac time. Isn't that cute? Some of where the sites are located during this time period, and you can see it basically the same as the previous time period, just more of them. And these are only a few of the sites. There are many more sites than this. These are just the ones I used in my dissertation research. And acorn processing and mortars and pestles at this point outnumber monos and metates. Just because you get a new technology doesn't mean you get rid of your old technology. We have backhoes now, but I still use a shovel. You know. Spear and dart points have serrated edges during this time period, which is just a stylistic thing and has nothing to do with their ability to kill a deer. It's actually a style that started down around the San Francisco Bay Area, and it just kind of floated up here. The growing population by 3,500 years ago starts to move out of the lake basin. They stay here, but the excess moves out of the lake basin into Sonoma and Mendocino County. There were already people in Sonoma and Mendocino County, Yukian-speaking people, but they were less populated. And Lake County had such good resources and a growing population, so the Lake County people just started marrying into those adjacent areas and taking with them their culture and technology. Linguists knew for years that all of the Pomo dialects throughout Sonoma and Mendocino County originated on the shores of Clear Lake. But they didn't know when that expansion occurred. It was archaeology we were able to do that actually pinpointed the time period when that expansion took place. Yeah, here's what the linguists knew. They knew that it occurred. They were pushing into the Yukian territory. They didn't know when. So, by 1,000 years ago, the Pomo culture expanded all the way to the coast. The Hokan speakers, right through the middle of the Yukian group. Now, this is the Yukian people here, the Wapo from Middletown and down the Napa Valley. Those are still Yukian people. And there's actually a group up in northern Mendocino County that are called the Yuki to this day. So permanent territories for each village, which remain, basically those boundaries are unchanged until Europeans arrived. The concept of private land ownership was established here in Lake County, and that's really unheard of anywhere in the world in tribal societies. In tribal societies, the village community territory is communal. You don't get private land ownership, but they had it here in Lake County. Families owned groves of oak trees and in some areas named tracts of land. If you were a child in the Elim community or the Amdot community or the Oi community in the eastern and southern arm of the lake, around the campfire you would learn a song as a young child, and that song would teach you the names of every family's privately owned territory in your village community area. So by the time you were 10, you knew everyone's territory, where their boundary was, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Pretty cool, huh? Shell bead money expanded throughout Northern California. The Pomo here at Clear Lake controlled the money supply used throughout most of Northern California. These are bead drills. That's a centimeter right there. So these things they're tiny. They're about half an inch, 3/4 of an inch long. Would drill a perfect 1/8 hole today if you put them on your drill. They're all triangular in cross section, and we found these first at this site over in Lucerne when Caltrans was widening the road through Lucerne. These are partially completed beads, made round. Some are drilled, some broke during the drilling process, and I started finding all of these. I was on this project, and I didn't even think about them, and then all of a sudden, whoa, wait a minute. They've got to be the drill tips for those beads. So, just before European invasion, don't worry, we'll get up and stretch pretty quick here. Just before the Europeans arrived, the hopper mortar is added to the toolkit. This is a flat slab with a little indentation in it, and that basket has a hole in the middle. So it provides a hopper so you can hold more acorns while you're pounding, and doesn't she look happy? That's an 1870s pen and ink drawing of a Pomo woman pounding acorns. The bow and arrow. We've got 20,000 years of culture here with no bow and arrow. So your concept of Native Americans with bows and arrows, throw that out the window. The bow and arrow didn't even arrive until 500 years before the Europeans did. All right? These are arrow points. Anything bigger than that is a spear point or a dart point. Resources dictated the seasonal movement of everyone. During most of the year, you were in the main village. Around the lake, You were there in the wintertime to hunt migratory ducks and do indoor activities. Every family had at least 2 or 3 different houses. One in the main village, one in a lakeshore camp or streamside camp, or one in an upland camp. This time of the year, right now, they would be moving to their upland camp to collect acorns, because the acorns are coming ripe and they're ready to pull off the trees.
When did they go over to the coast to get the seaweed and the salt?
After the white men arrived. Before then, they traded with the people in the Ukiah Valley because it was more economically efficient to trade with your next door neighbor than to walk all the way to the coast through unknown territory and then walk all the way back. Now, after the 1500s, when European diseases wiped out half of the Native American population in North America, there was not enough people to be able to trade with your next door neighbor anymore. So from then on, they had to walk to the coast if they wanted that stuff. Up until then, they would trade with their next door neighbor, who would trade with their next door neighbor, who would trade with the people on the coast. That makes sense? Good. This is what Lake County looked like at the time the Europeans arrived, and it's kind of a funky map, so I have a better one, which shows it a little better. These big red triangles are the political and religious centers for each of the tribes, and the dotted lines represent the boundaries for each of the tribal groups. This is Lucerne, Elim on Rattlesnake Island, Amdot on Anderson Island, Oi on Indian Island, Hulanapo, Habenapo, both now at the reservation in Big Valley, and up in northern end of the lake, you have the Chabe Matolel. So if you go to Running Creek Casino for their prime rib dinner or their seafood boat, it's being made for you by the Chabe Matolel. Chabe, that's Pomo for rock. Matolel, people, the rock people. There's going to be a test, so.
What does Habenapo mean?
Habenapo?
Habenapo,
Habenapo is also a rock.
rock what?
Right, rock people. Napo.
Napo.
Yeah, Habenapo. Obsidian is Gachachabe. Gachachabe, cutting rock. Konoti, big mountain. It's not some fanciful, you know, ooh, yeah. Konoti means mountain big. So, what was the political system? There were 3 Pomo dialects spoken around the lake. The eastern and northern lived around the main part of Clear Lake, Big Valley, Upper Lake. The southeastern Pomo lived in the southern and eastern arms of the lake. These are the earliest people in Lake County to be settled. These people are still living on the same plot of land that they've been living on for 14,000 years. And I know no other place in the world where a group of people has lived in one spot for 14,000 years.
The Klamath.
Hmm?
The Klamath.
The Klamath? Recent. 11 political centers around the lake, each with its own territorial boundary. Every village had a captain. They weren't called chiefs around here, they were called captains. Bolakwi is the word for captain. Bolakwi.
What's the difference? I mean, I know what the difference is in English, but how, in this culture, but how would you define it?
I think a chief had more power than a captain. The chief, you get chiefs in the plains and back east. But here it was, well, I'll go through it. It could be a man or a woman. The captain usually was selected through descent in a family, but that person had to be agreed upon by the whole group. So just because you were in line to become the captain of the village, doesn't mean you're going to be the captain of the village. If you're a poo-poo, they're going to vote you out. Each extended family had its own family captain, an elder, and a lot of times the villages would take those family captains and they would sit as a council and then choose among one of them to be the overall village captain. So what did a village captain do? Called ceremonial gatherings, entertained visitors, and granted permission for visiting outsiders to come and use the village lands and the village resources. But whenever you asked permission, you were supposed to give a percentage of what you gathered or collected to the village as payment for the use of those resources. Organized communal activities like mud hen drives and organized deer hunts or organized rabbit drives, that sort of thing. So that's what the captain did, and settled disputes. Most villages had a shaman or a curing doctor. Other professionals, basket makers, stone tool makers. Everyone could make baskets, everyone could make stone tools, everyone could hunt and fish. But there was that one person in the village that could sneak up on any deer at any time of the year. There was that one person that really knew how to make the good arrows and bows and quivers. There was that one basket maker that was so good, her baskets were watertight and you could cook in them. It was different there than here. Here we go to school. You can learn to become the president, mechanic, whatever. There you couldn't learn to become a basket maker, a professional basket maker. You were selected by the community's professional basket maker to be an apprentice to her, and that person taught you all you needed to know about basket making so that you would then replace her as the community's professional basket maker. It wasn't where you didn't go to a school so everybody in the village could learn. That was a valuable thing for the village. It was a valuable thing for you and your family. So you didn't want everyone knowing how to do that. Everything at a price in shell bead money, literally. They still make shell beads today. This is Gail White Rock at Elim, making shell beads. This is Kaidano again. That's some of Gail's work. They don't take these to the store and buy things with them anymore, but they wear them as dance regalia during their ceremonies. Villagers would have lines tattooed on their arms for measuring partial strings of beads, because you bought stuff based on how many beads. If you wanted a bow and a quiver of arrows, 3 strings of beads. You could hire a professional hunter or a fisherman. If you were throwing a wedding and you needed a bunch of deer meat, you'd hire a professional hunter to go out and catch the deer for you. If you had an ailment, you would hire a doctor to come and cure you. Manufactured items were usually purchased with shell beads. Gathered items were usually traded for other gathered items. It was the perfect combination of capitalism and communism.
Good thing we destroyed it then, huh?
Oh, my golly. This is an 1872 painting that was done of a ceremony at Elim that just recently sold at auction for $65,000. It was commissioned by the man that owned Sulphur Bank Mine. At its height, the Pomo culture was the result of 20,000 years of experience dealing with Lake County resources.
Do you know where that is?
Where that is?
Where the site is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, I have a 1906 photograph that was taken of the ruins of that dance house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Cool.
I've been doing this for 40 years. Anything you want to know.
How many people can fit in there?
How many people can fit in there? The dance house that they currently have at the reservation could seat comfortably 50.
It's a more.
This looks much bigger.
That one looks bigger, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really well built.
Yes, it is.
Wow.
And on top of the roof is soil with grass growing on it. If you looked at this from a distance, you would just see a hill, and the only hole you would see would be the smoke hole where the smoke from the fire. You actually walk down a ramp into the subterranean dance house. It's built very traditionally. The door always faces south. There are always multiples of 4 poles supporting the roof, a center pole, which is the connection between the underworld and the sky world. This particular painting was probably of a boy's manhood ceremony. So the sites around this lake contain 20,000 years record of cultural and environmental change. And the unwritten history of the cultures of Clear Lake. This is Indian Jim, and behind him you see Bloody Island, and I suspect, this is a 1906 photo, I suspect he was one of the survivors of the Bloody Island massacre. There was a Native American by the name of Jim that we know survived the Bloody Island massacre. The unwritten history of the environmental change. So yeah, not only do we find the cultural stuff in these sites, but those people are out gathering from the environment. The plants, the animals, all of that stuff gets put into these archaeological cultural sites. So by studying these sites, we're also reconstructing changes in the surrounding environment and how people affected that change. We're learning about population. I already showed you, they were overpopulated twice during the past 14,000 years. Once, because of change in weather patterns, took away a big food source. They had to compensate. Secondly, they overpopulated themselves by overusing the grain resources to the point where they needed another food source to take its place and to add to it, the mortar and pestle and acorns. So when they've dealt with all the same problems we're dealing with here today. Right now we have a problem with world overpopulation. We have a problem with unequal distribution of resources around the world. We have a problem with overexploitation of resources around the world. They've already dealt with those problems. Some of them they didn't succeed, some of them they did. So by studying these sites, we get a better idea of how to deal with our own worldwide problems. We're not the first to have to deal with this stuff. And they're still here. They're still adapting to change and hanging on to their traditional culture. Lights, stretch. Have some refreshments.
So John, did the Pobos do hot matches?
No, that was just the Northwest Coast.
Oh.
What about the holes in the stationary rocks that were used for grandeur? Any of those around here?
Yeah, bedrock mortars.
Is that what they're called?
Yeah, that's what they're called.
So they actually had to grind those out.
They had to use a harder rock than the rock that it's made in and just chip away until you got that, yeah. Hi, I know you. By the way, this is Patty Brown from the New York Times. That had very limited resources to begin with. So converting a limited resource area to a single crop agriculture area was not that big of a stress for them. They were already going to be stressed during a drought. But you would never want to take a resource area like this and wipe out everything and just plant grapes. Oh, I mean, and just... Did I say that out loud? Pears. Or pears. You know what? That's interesting. Pears, you mentioned, or pears. The very first explorers that came over the hill and looked at Big Valley saw orchards of oak trees. Not irrigated, but carefully tended and growing equal space from each other. Any competing tree was pulled up, taken out, and They were, and he actually says in his diary, as if laid out by a skillful landscape gardener. That's what Big Valley looked like 1,000 years ago, an orchard of oak trees. When the white settlers came in, they dynamited those trees and planted walnuts. And Big Valley was an orchard of walnuts. And then those, the price of walnuts dropped, so those were yanked out, and pears were planted. Price of pears, wine's more expensive, let's plant grapes. Big Valley has been an orchard valley for 6,000 years. Yeah. Cool.
Tell me if you happen to find a spear point or an arrowhead or whatever laying on the ground, what's the appropriate thing to do?
If you find an arrowhead laying on the ground on your property, it's yours.
Okay.
If you find it on anywhere else, it's not yours and it's against the law to pick it up. But if you find one and you're worried about somebody else stealing it or whatever, contact the Historical Society, call me. We, you know, if we know where they are, we keep collections of these things based on where they're located. That way we can tell how old those sites are.
How many different kinds of clams do you find around the lake?
As far as I know, there's only one native clam. It's a freshwater mussel, actually. It's about this big around, about that thick. And they were eaten by the Native Americans all around the lake. There are a lot of clams that have been brought here as bait. The Japanese cockles and that sort of thing that have taken over the lake bed.
Oh, those little white shells that are not, those are not.
Those are Japanese cockles. Those are brought in for fish bait. Yeah. And just took over. That's the problem that this lake has faced throughout the time Europeans have been here. Fish introduced species of fish that have wiped out the indigenous species of fish. You know, those cockles, all of this stuff. We have trashed this lake. And there's, unfortunately, to the point of never being able to take it back to where it was. The first trashing came at the turn of the century when it was very popular to sell live carp to the Chinese market in San Francisco. So a couple of ranchers up here decided they'd put in big carp ponds and raise carp and ship them over St. Helena down to San Francisco where they got big bucks. Well, that market crashed and they were stuck with these big ponds of carp. So a couple of them dumped them into the lake. Guess what? That's what we have every year. They breed. When they breed, they die. The dead carp wash up on the lake shore. When they're breeding, they're hitting each other underwater. They're messing with the grebe nests. They'll knock grebe nests over with the eggs in them. I mean, it's a trashy fish that never belonged in Clear Lake. And it's been a terrible thing to happen to the lake. Those of you who've been here a long time and fished this lake a long time, you remember the crappie, the crooked tail? Remember the crooked tail crappie? There was a crooked tail crappie. It was really a cool fish. It just had a crook in its tail. Well, the fishermen didn't like to fillet those because of that crooked tail. You know, you'd much rather fillet a crappie that had a nice straight tail. So the fishermen would throw those back in the lake. Guess what?
More and more and more.
Guess what? Yeah. The straight-tailed crappie kind of went away, and pretty soon we had hardly any just crooked-tailed crappie. That's human intervention messing with genetics. And but then somebody introduced an East Coast crappie, and now we don't have hardly any crappie. The East Coast crappie are eating the babies of the traditional Lake County crappie that we used to have. You used to be able to walk out into that lake, and literally the crappie would come up and nibble on your leg hairs. You didn't have to have bait on the hook. You could just dangle it in the water. You'd have a crappie. You could catch a whole mess of them. I could go on and on like this. My parents have some friends. Had never been fishing before. Brought them up to Clear Lake. And the guy, we were weighted out, you know, and he had this thing of worms on his belt. And so he shoved his pole down in his suit so he could reach and get a worm out of his thing. Well, the hook was dangling in the water and a crappie took it. And then the pole went over like this and he just went. His wife was even funnier. She would go way back to cast, you know. She'd way back like this, and she went way back, and her hook hit the water, and she got a crappie on it. Fish went flying. I have lots of stories about Lake County. I grew up spending my vacations and here. But yeah, fun. What?
My kids now are, a couple of them are on paleo diet.
Paleo diets?
Yeah, there's books on paleo.
I'm sure there are, yeah.
So that means what?
Oh, paleo? Ancient, old. Paleo Indian means old Indian or ancient Indians, right?
I thought maybe it meant a certain way they ate.
Paleo climate means the ancient climate. Yeah. There's some other things I didn't have a chance to pass around. Some of you have seen these. They are prehistoric golf balls. The Pomo actually invented golf.
I thought it was in Scotland.
This is the only pottery that the Pomo had. This is baked clay balls. They were sling stones used to get migratory ducks. And you would have a pouch like this with leather thongs going out. You put one of those in the middle and pull the thongs together and go like this around your head, and then let go of one of those, and the ball would fly out into a flock of duck or geese. And if you're lucky, you'd hit 2 or 3 at a time. There are so many of these in the lake that there are certain places around Anderson Marsh where you are walking on those, not on the ground. What about it?
So I found that in my yard.
You found this in your yard?
Yep.
It's made out of borax lake obsidian, and it is
Spear point?
a big spear point. The rule of thumb is if you rub your thumb along it and you cut yourself, it's a point. You rub your thumb along
It's a spear.
and you don't cut yourself, it's a knife. That's a point.
So can you tell some age?
I
Like how
can't
this
tell. In order to date this,
You have to chemically do it?
you have to cut it.
Oh.
You probably don't want
Yeah, I
that.
don't
then.
want to do that.
The way we date obsidian, when this obsidian is chipped, there's a fresh break. A real fresh break as that surface starts to absorb moisture from the atmosphere. And it seeps into the outer layer of this glass. This actually is glass, natural glass. And it creates a little rind, kind of like a watermelon rind. As it seeps into the outer layer of the glass, it seeps in at a rate of 1 micron for every 1,000 years. Anybody know what a micron is?
Very small.
Right, it must be small, it sounds small. Millionth of a centimeter, I think. Or a millimeter, I don't know. I don't do this. I send it into a lab. So what they do, if you want to know how old this is, when this was chipped, you take a diamond saw and you cut a little sliver out of this, and you grind that down real small, and you lay it on a slide, and you look at it under a special microscope, and you measure the thickness of that rind. Yeah, we call it a hydration rim. Hydration, that's just a fancy word for water. That's one thing that you learn when you go to college and get a PhD. You learn all
know a
these
lot of terms.
fancy words
To impress me.
which make no sense to a normal person. Like, but when you write your dissertation, you have to use all those big fancy words so that your professors will think you're smart. Like stratigraphy. You know, I could say stratigraphy, or I could say layers of soil. What? You know, why would I say stratigraphy when everybody understands layers of soil?
You live very close to it.
Anyway, if you want to learn about those 2,000 plants and animals that the Native Americans used, this is the book. They probably have it here in this library. It's called Tending the Wild.
We found all of these in the yard.
And this lady went through all the records, all the anthropology notes. She interviewed tribal elders all over the state, learned about all the different practices for gathering, collecting, burning. If you know, in order to ensure a good acorn crop, you want to burn the ground under the oak tree once every 3 years, because there's a There's a little grub that bores into the acorn and eats it from the inside. That's why those acorn woodpeckers are putting acorns in the trees.
Yeah.
They're actually growing and harvesting those grubs. Yeah, they are smart birds. So they put those acorns in the tree and then they go away and they wait for the grub to go in there and eat the thing and get nice and big, and then they come back and eat the grub. They're horticulturalists, aren't they? But those grubs become a beetle on the ground during certain times of the year. That's when the Native Americans would burn the grass around the oak trees, so that they would burn those beetles, and that way the grubs wouldn't get up and infest their acorns. So regular burning did a lot of things. That's just one example. If you burn an area that's all brush, you create a boundary between a brushy area and a meadow. In a meadow, you get this many species of animals and plants. In a brushy area, you get this many species of animals and plants. In that zone between the two, you get all of the species of both areas. You get twice as much food resources in the boundary area between the brush and the meadow, or between the forest and the meadow, or between the forest and the brush. So they were regularly burning every year to create boundaries to increase the natural production of plants and animals.
Which prevented forest fires.
Which prevented forest fires. This would never have happened 1,000 years ago.
They were burning that big of areas?
They weren't burning that big of areas, but they were burning every year, so there was never that big of an overgrown area to take off. Yeah, literally, they would come out from their hunting trip and toss a lighted match over their shoulder on their way out. In the fall, just before the rainy season, so it wasn't a danger. Yeah, and it took care of the underbrush, which allowed the deer more easily passageways through the area. Always. All right, I'm gonna sit down and chip a little obsidian.
These things are works of art. They're just beautiful.
Oh, you like them?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, those are ones I made.
Oh, really? I saw you back there. Yeah, I'm glad you did, thanks.
May I just stand here and watch you? Sure. You can stand, you can sit on the ground. Come on around if you want to take a look. What time is it?
3:20.
3:20.
Have I been talking that long? Well, let's see if I can crank one of these out. Now, this actually is glass. It has the exact same chemical composition as Pyrex. Pyrex? Yes. But you don't want to use this in an oven because of all of the little miniature little gas bubbles. So if you put it in an oven and heated it up, those bubbles would expand and they would explode. But the chemical composition is the same as Pyrex. You all know how obsidian breaks already. If you have seen a BB hole in a window, where the BB hits, there's a little teeny hole and a kind of a cone-shaped piece of glass pops off the back. That's called conchoidal fracturing. That's how all glass breaks, even obsidian. If I wanted, I could hit this in the middle, there'd be a little hole, a big cone shape would pop off the back. That's not what I'm interested in. What I want is a nice, flat flake of this stuff so I can shape it into a knife or a point or some other kind of tool. So instead of hitting it in the middle, I want to hit it on the edge so that part of that force field goes through the rock, part of it just dissipates out into the air, and it'll take off
You get a flake.
a flake. And if you look at this flake, you'll see that cone shape. About half of the cone shape is right there. The other half just went out into the air, and you can kind of see the cone shape on the original rock here. Now, the reason that this rock cracked is because this stone that I'm using to hit it with is too hard. You have to use something softer than the obsidian to make these flakes like this. And is it sharp? Yes, it's very sharp. These things are used in cosmetic surgery now because they don't leave scars. If you cut, oh, that wasn't even a, if you cut through the individual cell instead of ripping the cells apart, then they'll go back together without leaving a scar. So they actually take flake blades. They use the same technology that the Aztecs developed to remove blades of obsidian off of a big rock. And as long as you take them off the rock in a sterile environment, they're still as sterile as when they came out of the volcano at 2,000 or 3,000 degrees. So if you don't want a scar, you tell your surgeon to use an obsidian blade.
Tell me again, why does the flake blade perform better than a razor or something else for surgery? You said
It's much sharper than you can ever get a surgical scalpel. If you look at the edge of a surgical scalpel under a high-powered microscope, it's jagged like this. If you look at the edge of one of these flakes, it's just a straight line.
Oh, and apparently a whole edge line.
Now, I always wear glasses. I always hit downward because I don't want anything flying up in my face. I just picked up this rock on the Borax Lake Obsidian flow this afternoon, so I don't know how good of a piece it is. But, you know, I may be able to get something out of it. It's kind of hard to say. It's got some impurities running through it.
I noticed you got a box of Band-Aids there. Just saying.
Like I said, this stuff is really, really sharp. I have cut myself to the bone on this thumb, but within 3 days it was completely healed. Wow. Because that's another thing about the sharpness of the cut. It heals much faster. It doesn't leave a scar. So, where's my other... Ah, here we go.
Have you made yourself a kitchen knife out of that stuff?
No, I haven't. No, I do this. I don't do this very often. It takes me, depending on the stone, it takes me about 5 minutes to do an arrow point. It takes me about 20 minutes to a half hour to do a spear point. Give me that piece that's over there on the table. I like that better. This is Napa obsidian. And Napa obsidian's much nicer, easier to work. And here we go.
Was it more expensive to get?
No, I just drove down.
No, I mean for the natives.
Oh.
Did they pay more for the Napa?
No, you just drive down the highway there. You would have to trade for it. If you were a Pomo around Clear Lake, you'd have to trade for the Napa obsidian, which they did. And actually, the Borax Lake obsidian was traded throughout Northern California, and actually throughout the western states. So the Pomo, southeastern Pomo that controlled the Borax Lake obsidian flow, were very wealthy. Not only did they control one of the main obsidian sources used in the state, they also controlled access along the primary trade route between the coast. Where is my other one? I don't know, I guess I'll use this one. Between the coast and the Central Valley. They also manufactured the money that was used throughout Northern California. So they were very wealthy people from about 6,000 years ago till the time European diseases came through.
So what makes obsidian different?
Different than what?
The other kind of obsidian?
Napa and...
Oh, Napa obsidian. Every obsidian has a little bit of different chemical composition. Borax Lake obsidian. I'll pass this around. Be very careful that you don't cut yourself. Borax Lake obsidian has little tiny crystals in it. I sometimes refer to them as zits. So that makes Borax Lake obsidian very brittle, and unpredictable when you're trying to make a stone tool out of it. Your pressure force going through the rock may hit one of those crystals and bounce off.
Bottle Rock Road.
Bottle Rock Road, that's all borax, that's all Canocti obsidian. Yeah, Canocti obsidian is got zits, and they're actually olivine crystals, and it's very difficult to work, and it was not traded very much. I mean, the people around the lake would use it, but it didn't get traded very much. Borax Lake obsidian, the obsidian flow covers about 1.5 square miles, and there are places on the Borax Lake obsidian flow where the quarry and workshop sites are the size of a football field and 5 to 10 feet thick of chips like this, where people have sat there for 14,000 years making stone tools, or making what's called blanks used for trade. This is what they would do. They would sit there and make one of these, and then this was traded to the next group over and got traded to the next group over, and throughout the trade system it would end up in Nevada or Oregon or wherever.
How far east do they go?
I'm not sure exactly how far east we have Borax Lake obsidian. I know it goes all the way down to the central coast. San Luis Obispo County, we found it down there.
Were there professional tool makers?
Yes, professional tool makers. Everyone in the community knew how to make stone tools. Even the children could make a knife or whatever. But there were professional guys, and that's all they did was make the stone tools. You always have to use something softer than the obsidian. This deer antler is about the same hardness as copper. In fact, when Ishi wandered into camp over in the Central Valley and ended up being taken to the Lowy Museum
Here's this one.
at Berkeley, he was very excited that we had this stuff here, copper wire, because the copper wire was the same hardness as the deer antler, and with copper wire it didn't dull as quickly. And this tool that I'm using right here is called an Ishi stick, because he invented this to chip obsidian or chip chert or any other rock. This is the same as when I hit it with that rock. This is the same technique, only instead of hitting it, I'm putting gradual pressure until I pop a flake off the bottom side. But it's the same conchoidal fracture as if I were hitting it with a rock. It's called pressure flaking. The reason I took this up as just a fun thing to do was because as an archaeologist working in Lake County, I find tons of obsidian flakes in the archaeological sites I work on. So I wanted to know if there was a way, if I look at these flakes, can I tell what part of the process these flakes came from? Were they the part of the process where the initial core was used to strike off a big flake? Were they part of the process where that big flake was whittled down into the general shape of what I wanted to make? Or were they pressure flakes that were taken off with the deer antler from the final product? And it turns out that yes, I can tell, because I do this, when I'm going through the obsidian that I find on a prehistoric site, I can actually reconstruct what part of the stone tool making process was going on there. And in some sites, they were doing it all. In some sites, they were only doing the finishing touches. I can tell if it's a hunting camp or a village site. If it's a village site, they're doing the whole process. If they're out on a hunting camp, they've already got pieces that are almost the shape of a point, and all they're doing is retouching the edges. Or maybe they broke one during the hunt, and so they're doing this to just put a new tip on it.
Repairable then.
Repairing it, right. And so, yeah, it's something like I was showing in the slides. It's one of the things that archaeologists do to be better prepared to do the CSI work that you do when you're out on a site. To try to figure out what activities were going on. Boy, everybody's so quiet. I know you all want me to cut myself. Huh? It's kind of like watching a NASCAR race. You don't watch,
gonna say that.
You don't watch a NASCAR race for the race. You watch a NASCAR race for the crashes, right?
Doesn't obsidian always crack you?
Yeah. But yeah, if I did this for a living, I'd be able to whip out an arrow point probably in a minute and a half, and a spear point in maybe 5 minutes. The part of the hunting equipment that takes the most time and energy to make is not the point, it's the shaft. So when you're out hunting and you shoot an arrow or throw a spear and it hits a rock and breaks the tip off, you're going to retrieve the shaft and take the shaft back to your camp, pull the base of the old tip out of the shaft and put a new tip in. And that shows up out in the real world. Remember I said one of the things we have to know about is patterns of discard. So if you're out hunting, the tip, the broken tip, is going to be out in the woods. Back at the hunting camp or the village, you're going to find the broken bases because they took the shaft back to the village, took the base out, put a new tip in, went back out hunting. And that's what we find. Cheyenne and I, my wife Cheyenne, she's an archaeologist too, just finished doing 500 acres, walking 500 acres of land south of Canocti, which is scheduled to be converted to vineyards.
Oh, really?
And one afternoon, walking through old walnut orchards, we came up with like 30 spear points. Wow. You know, I mean, it seems like every 20 or 30 feet we were coming across a broken spear point, usually the tips. It was a hunting area, very, very popular hunting area. Over thousands of years, the points represented several different time periods. If you look at that handout that I have, you can see that certain styles were only made during certain time periods. And we actually found styles from almost all of those time periods.
So that stopped the progress of the vineyard?
No, that doesn't stop the progress of the vineyard. There are the law that protects historic and archaeological sites protects the information that they contain. So if you can recover the information from the resource before you disturb it, you're allowed to disturb it. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay.
No, it does.
Yeah, the laws protect the information. Yeah. It's like that book there that I was telling you about. I equate archaeological sites to a book of information. Mm-hmm. So the landowner can either move their project somewhere else to preserve that book and the information it contains, or they can pay to have an archaeologist read that book and get that information out of the ground, and then they can disturb or destroy that part of the site. Now, I always try to push landowners towards preserving the site, keep that book in the library for when we want to study it, and even build your house on top of it. If that's, you know, it'll still be there. In fact, in Morro Bay, I had a landowner come up to me that had bought a parcel right in the middle of the biggest Indian village site in Morro Bay, and he asked me, can I do anything with this? And I said, yes. Bring in 3 feet of fill. Cover the whole thing with fill, enough fill to incorporate your foundation footings and your utility trenches and then build on top of the fill. That's what he did. There are 4 single-family homes and 3 duplexes right on top of that village site. Didn't do any damage to the site except where they had to connect to the existing sewer and water lines under the street. We hit 3 burials just in those connection trenches. So imagine what we'd have hit if he had decided to do his trenching in the site soil and not on fill. So there are different ways to protect the resources and allow development to proceed. That's just one way.
Well, you'd have to take his house down if you wanted to go back and find the book.
The book has been there for 10,000 years.
His house will be there.
The life expectancy of a normal house is what, 80 years? So for a short amount of time, that book is been checked out by somebody else. But you know what? 80 years from now, our technology for reading that book is going to be so much better. I would much rather leave it in the library for study later. The other thing is, right now we have worldwide problems that we need to address. So we want to study sites inhabited by people that have already addressed those problems. We don't want to go out and dig up all the site. We just want to look at the problems that we have to address now. 100 years from now, there may be totally different problems that we're facing. So if we dig up and read that book, it may not be there 100 years from now when we have to deal with another problem. Maybe we didn't get the information out of the ground that we needed to address that problem because we didn't know what the problem was going to be 100 years from now. So we would just as soon keep those books in the library, untouched, until they're needed to address those problems.
And in a way, that house is
The house is protecting it.
protecting
Right.
the book.
It is. It's true. It keeps it protected from looters and other things.
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, I am not anti-development. I am for planned development, and that's actually how I make my living. The laws require that before you get a discretionary permit, you have the property looked at by an archaeologist to identify the resources that are there and determine whether they're significant or not. We just finished doing, last month, we did the historical evaluation of Hoburg's Resort. If you go to that website that's on my handout, you can see the Hoburg's Resort Historical Evaluation Report. We took
Really?
pictures of all the structures out there. We figured out what time period they were all manufactured or built. We were able to find original apple trees that were planted by Gustav Hoburg back in the 1890s. We found a tunnel to an underground storage place that rumor says was used to hide their slot machines and their booze during Prohibition.
Probably.
And, you know, so, and I was scheduled tomorrow
Yeah.
to give the Historical Society talk at Hoburg's Resort and a walking tour of the resort.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
Well, it's a
So,
good thing at least you got all that information.
I know, in fact, I got an email from Richard Coel, the head of the county development department,
Oh, yeah, right.
saying, wow, I'm sure glad you were able to get out there and document that now that it's gone.
Isn't it like a miracle that you were there and you took all these pictures and everything?
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
thank God.
If a person knows of a historical site, how do you tell if it's been researched?
There's a state agency that's part of the state park, funded by the state park system, called the California Historical, CHRIS, Historical Resource Inventory System. California Historical Resources Inventory System. CHRIS, C-H-R-I-S. And it's several offices around the state that maintain all of the records of the recorded historic and archaeological sites throughout California. For our area, it's located at Sonoma State University. And they've got all of the records of all the recorded archaeological sites from the San Francisco Bay north to the Oregon border in the Coast Range Mountains. I think Chico State, I think, has the other part of the
They
state.
would have Silicon Valley.
So they might have Silicon Valley, yeah. And I helped set up that office back in the 70s. I ran one of those offices out of UCLA for 4 years when I was going to UCLA. I was responsible for maintaining all the records for the sites in LA, Ventura, and Orange County. And so anytime I come across a site, I fill out, there's state forms that we fill out, send to that office, and then they plot those on the map. And if you're a landowner, you're allowed access to that information. If you're an archaeologist, you're allowed access to that information as long as you sign a confidentiality agreement. I'm not allowed to tell anybody where any sites are located because of the problem with looting. And planners that are working on specific projects are allowed access to that information. That information has been exempted from the Freedom of Information Act. So if you were to go to that office and demand to see that stuff because the Freedom of Information Act says I can see any government papers that are existing, no. Site location information is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act because of the problem with looting. Otherwise, we'd have books published out there for bottle collectors and artifact hunters and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming.
No, it was wonderful.
The reason I asked, down the street from me when I was a kid, there were 3 Indian burial grounds that got bulldozed and put industrial buildings on top of.
That's before the California Environmental Quality Act was
Probably.
passed. Yeah, the California Environmental Quality Act
I've always worried about them.
The California Environmental Quality Act is the law that protects those resources during the development process, but it wasn't passed until 1971, and it wasn't really fully enforced around the state for another 6 or 8 years. In fact, in Lake County, it sometimes still isn't enforced.
Oh, it's true everywhere.
But you know, there's such a development lobby always putting pressure on to ignore those laws that you have to really be attentive and keep vigilant about those things. That's one of the reasons why I decided Anderson Marsh needed to be a protected park, because having it on the National Register, it took me about 6 months to fill out the forms and get it listed on the National Register. I thought that was going to do the trick to protect it, but within a year, the county had put a sewer line through the middle of one of the sites. There were literally human remains poking out of the trench of the sewer trench. The county had issued a permit to allow a real estate office to be built in the middle of one of the other sites. And the landowner decided to level another site for an irrigation ditch because he was going to drain Anderson Marsh and plant corn. So I realized within a year of having it on the National Register that just because it's on the National Register doesn't mean it's going to be protected in Lake County.
So basically, what do you have to do in a situation like that? I mean, if a person's an ordinary citizen and they want to save a particular, they know of a site that is being developed without going through a CEQA process, what do they do? Who do they call? Who do they call?
Who are you going to call?
Yeah.
Ghostbusters. You really have to keep your nose to the information thread that comes out of the county Community Development Department. It used to be called the Planning Department.
Right.
Not anymore. Now it's called the Community Development Department. That tells you right there what their attitude is. But when I first moved back to Lake County, the first thing I did was I went in to the Community Development Department. And I sat down and talked to Rick Coel, who's our director of that department. And I said, I'm an archaeologist. I'm concerned about these resources. You will be hearing from me. You can call me a loose cannon if you want, but my aim is going to always be right there. So follow the laws, pay attention to those resources, and you won't hear from me. And
That's great.
and he ignored me.
Well, that time you did, I bet.
And,
But not after that.
He's, yeah, it's a problem here in Lake County, and actually, the people that have managed to push preservation of sites along the farthest are the Native American communities.
They have a lot of clout. I
They
think,
do now.
just
Now
because
that
they are Native American.
yeah, now that they have some funding and don't have to spend all their time just trying to make ends meet, they have more time to get into the preservation activities and that sort of thing. Well, it's not perfect.
And what would that be used for?
That's an arrow point.
It's quite beautiful.
That's an arrow point. This is a spear point.
So
Anything smaller than, an arrow point's not gonna be any bigger than that.
So you weren't making.
You don't want your arrow point to be any wider than the shaft.
Ah,
What kind of wood would they use for the shaft?
Um,
Do you know? I
yeah,
heard yew was
creek
one.
dogwood.
Creek dog.
Yeah, dogwood has a very straight shaft, straight grain, light,
It's a kind
and,
tree.
Nice long flakes. Not bad.
yeah, I'm not that good really, but I'm getting there.
I was gonna sneeze, but.
All right, any other questions?
This is a question that's a little bit off track, but it's something that just came to my attention recently. A book that I was reading, that was just talking about the archaeology of the history of North America. And they maintained that the die-off of large mammals, like the woolly mammoths and therefore the predators that predated on them, was actually caused by human
Very
intervention,
possible.
overhunting.
Very possible.
I know, I mean, it seems
Yeah.
crazy, but
Well,
especially if
and
they were using sticks, sharpened sticks.
there's, the evidence is the woolly mammoths and those animals were doing fine until the invention of the spear point.
Oh,
As soon as the spear point, as soon as the stone tip was invented, those animals started going extinct. Between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago is when those points were invented, and that's when those animals went extinct. Now, some biologists say that's the end of the Ice Age, so it was weather patterns and environment that did it. But I don't buy that, because we still have Ice Age weather patterns and Ice Age environment in Canada and Alaska. So they should still be there, but they're not. The ones that went extinct are the ones that have long gestation periods and only have one baby per gestation period, like the mammoth, you know, these things. But then you have to ask yourself, okay, we still have elephants, right?
Barely.
Where are the elephants? In Africa, in the desert of Africa, where very few humans were wandering. But here, in North and South America, there were tons of humans, and they were bumping into the mammoths all the time. You don't have to kill off very many mammoths before you've reduced their population to the point where they can't recover. And you don't have to, you know, like you say, you don't have to hunt a saber-toothed cat to make it go extinct. All you have to do is hunt its prey to a certain level, and the saber-toothed cats can no longer get enough prey to survive. So, you know, that's, I agree. I think it's human interaction that did away with the camels, the pygmy horses, the woolly mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the three-toed ground sloth, which was already a slow animal, and most of the flightless birds.
That's really interesting.
You know, I think it is. Now, there's another biological group, a group of biologists that are trying to see if there was a virus or something that took off through the animal kingdom at that time.
Might be a
Same thing as
combination.
humans.
And it could have been. It could have been a
Yeah,
lot of it.
I think everybody killer pill. Or you have
Humans
it.
are the
I don't want to
Humans
damage
right
them, and I
now
don't
are the
want to
problem.
cut
I
myself.
got, you know,
We're definitely overpopulated. My whole research for years, my research has been studying population, because all the other problems we have in the world are due to overpopulation. If we had a third of the people on the planet right now, we would not have a problem with resources. We would not have a problem with, you know, any of these other problems. The other thing that people don't really think much about, our worldwide population right now is right here. And it's here because for the past 100 years, we've been using petroleum to manufacture food, to process food, to fertilize food. We've been using petroleum. How many more years of petroleum do we have? It's definitely a limited resource, and we're definitely going to run out of it. And when we do, that artificially high food resource that we now have worldwide, which has created this artificially high population, is going to drop.
But what about climate change? I have a feeling that's gonna get us quicker.
Climate change is going to happen for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it is happening. I have
It's
a
hap-
feeling
yeah,
it's
it's
gonna get us
happening.
before we run out of.
It's not going to get us because we will live through climate change. A lot of us will. I mean, some won't. It will definitely take away from a lot of our food supply, but I don't think as much as the end of petroleum.
Interesting.
Luckily, in Lake County, we're already pretty much an agrarian society here. So it's not going to affect us much, not nearly as much as it's going to affect Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose. You won't be able to have a big city. You will have to live within walking distance of your food source. There won't be big cities. We will all be going back to an agrarian society like it was in the 1880s, 1850s.
Horses will become valuable again.
Horses will become valuable again, absolutely. So,
Do you remember the program called ZPG a long time ago, Zero Population Growth?
oh yeah, yeah.
That went by the wayside a long time ago.
Yeah, no, humans have a problem with, we
have
can,
the technology,
we
like
can
you
double
said,
our,
that it
yeah,
is-
technology has always saved us.
Yeah.
To-
it's-
so
it's
far.
allowed
They
us to
created the problem.
increase also.
So
And
far.
you think of advances in medicine, it was something
Are you from
like
Lisbon?
half of all the children born in the 1800s died before they.
Yeah, right, yeah, and that's part of our problem. Maybe we should get rid of that medicine.
Thank you, Dr. Parker, it's been great.
Oh, thanks for coming out.
Thank you. So I forget how many, we were talking earlier on the way here, how much of the,
I didn't know I was on the website.
of the
I wanted to tell them.
vegetable, fruit and vegetable baskets in the Central Valley. But there's a lot, right, of vegetables that are raised in the Central Valley, something like.
Or the current food supply.
Oh, yeah, actually,
And the water, for her
Seems-
climate change comment, the water
Seems like I read
supply is
somewhere
going
that-
to affect that.
half or a third of the US
Half or
Some
third.
huge
vegetables
amount.
are grown in the Central
Right,
Valley.
and if we have some more, this is to her comment about.
Well, even if we have the same amount of precipitation, we're not getting the snow melt, so the whole water supply system doesn't feed.
There's a
the
whole
Central-
nother problem with the
doesn't feed
Central Valley that
Valley.
UC Davis is working on right now. They've been working on it for several years. Irrigation agriculture is not sustainable because when you irrigate a piece of land, some of that water evaporates. When it evaporates, it leaves behind salts.
Right.
And that's why Mesopotamia is a desert now. That used to be the Fertile Crescent.
The fertile.
The Fertile Crescent is now a desert because of salt and silt. When you irrigate agriculture, you bring in silt and you leave salt behind. And eventually the salt gets to the point where you can no longer grow anything. Right now, UC Davis is already developing salt-tolerant strands of tomatoes so that they could still grow tomatoes in the southern Central Valley. Because the soil down there is so salty, it will not grow normal strands of tomatoes.
Oh, no, that means that each plant then has to have a
Isn't a lot
salt
of that
tolerance.
from chemical fertilizers?
Right, exactly.
That
So
won't work.
irrigation agriculture will only work for a certain number of years before it wipes out the system. And
Isn't
you
that
can no
true here
longer.
in Lake County too?
It'll happen here if we use irrigation agriculture, yeah. Most of Lake County, most of the valleys in Lake County are low enough that they're just, all of the plants, trees are getting water, groundwater, so they're not being irrigated. All of these trees, except for the vineyards up on the hillsides. But,
So what's the other way? Water bath kind of thing that?
oh, their root systems are down below the water table. They're getting water from the lake that seeps back into Big Valley, underground through the gravels. And so you don't have to irrigate these walnut trees and that sort of thing.
But besides irrigation agriculture, what's our next choice?
I don't
Less
know.
people,
Less-
population, I guess.
Less people.
Yeah.
No, what was the water thing?
Well, there are, under certain conditions, you can dry farm, but only,
Yeah.
only when the soil and the water table. permit.
Right, yeah, most of Lake County can be dry farmed.
Dr. Parker, I'm running out of battery. Would you say goodbye for the camera?
Oh, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.